God bless Texas. And let me say, God bless the conservative grassroots activists across this state who hold every single elected official accountable. I am so proud to be with so many friends. I'm so proud to be with patriots. I'm so proud to be back in Texas. Tonight I want to talk to you about where we are and where we're going. And I'll cheat and give you a hint that where we're going is a lot better than where we are. But let's start with where we are. Washington, D.C. is bat crap crazy. That's actually a technical medical diagnosis. Now look, it's bad. It's never been this bad. You've got Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Tweedledum, Tweedledummer. And here's the scary thing. None of them are driving the truck. They have handed the policy agenda over to the crazies in their party. You want to know who's driving the truck? It's Bernie Sanders, and it's Elizabeth Warren, and it's AOC. That's the policy agenda. All right, 7 months. What's happened in 7 months? Number one, we're on a path to spending $9.5 trillion. Now look, even in Washington, that's real money. You know, it's hard to tell what's $9.5 trillion mean. And one of the problems talking about numbers is for a whole lot of people, it's hard to tell the difference between a million and a billion and a trillion. They've all got an illion. They all sound big. Let's put that in context. $9.5 trillion is more than double what the United States spent winning World War II. In 12 months, we're going to spend more than twice as much as we spent to win World War II. That is crazy, that is reckless, and it's irresponsible. The Democrats in Congress are fixing to raise taxes on everything. We're taking up Bernie Sanders' budget. Bernie Sanders' budget, they say it's $3.5 trillion. It's already been raised to $4.2 trillion. It's going up. And every tax you can think of is going up. Individual tax rates are going up. Corporate tax rates are going up. Small business taxes are going up. Capital gains taxes are going up. The death tax is going up. Everything they see, they're going to tax or regulate. And then there's the insanity of what's happening on our southern border. Now, look, over the last decade, I've been down to our border many, many times. I've sat down over and over again with Border Patrol agents. I've gone out on midnight patrol with Border Patrol agents repeatedly. It's always been a challenge. It's always been a problem. But it is worse now than it has ever been in our lifetimes. A couple of months ago, I brought 19 senators down to the border. 19 senators. We went out on patrol with the Border Patrol agents. We went right to the banks of the Rio Grande. On the other side, you could see the cartels with high-powered flashlights shining them on us across the river. They thought we were Border Patrol agents. They were yelling at the Border Patrol agents, taunting them. You can't catch us. There's nothing you can do to stop us. The agents who were with us said they did that every single night. We saw a stream of humanity coming across the border. Women with small children, young moms carrying infants, nursing, little kids, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, walking alone without a parent. In 6 months, we have had over 1 million illegal aliens cross this country. We're on a path to 2 million this year. This is the worst and the highest rate of illegal immigration in 21 years. And it's man-made. Here is a point that is incredibly important to understand. This catastrophe was caused by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And there are 3 decisions specifically that they made in the first week in office that caused this crisis. Number 1, they immediately halted construction of the border wall. We went down, we saw miles upon miles of border wall, and they ordered the contractors, drop your tools. So we saw rebar just sitting on the ground, rusting. Walls going on for miles and then just halting with a giant hole, and guess where the people were coming through? The giant hole. They had driveways up to the gate that was meant to be put in, they never put the gate in. So it's just a hole. That was decision number 1. Decision number 2, they reinstated the failed policy of catch and release. What that means is when they catch someone, they let them go, and they say, hey, we'll give you a court date sometime in the future. Would you please show up? And I know everyone here will be shocked to hear they don't show up. But the third decision they made, it's actually the most indefensible of the 3. They ended the Remain in Mexico International Agreement. Now, what was that? Remain in Mexico was an agreement President Trump negotiated with the government of Mexico. You may remember in 2019, President Trump threatened tariffs against Mexico and to cripple their economy unless they agreed to help on illegal immigration. Well, they did. And Remain in Mexico was an agreement that said when people from Central America cross illegally into Mexico, that they would remain in Mexico while their U.S. asylum case was proceeding. And it worked. Last year, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. It was an unmitigated success, and what did Joe Biden do? The first week in office, he took that international agreement, he tore it to shreds, and he unleashed a torrent of illegal immigration. Now, let me tell you, the Democrats like to say they're doing this because they're compassionate. Let me tell you something. There ain't nothing compassionate about putting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of children in the custody of human traffickers. The people smuggling folks in, they're not bearded, tree-hugging, Birkenstock-wearing social workers. They're not, no offense on the beard. I'm trying to catch up to you. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. These guys are vicious international criminals. They're physically assaulting these kids. They're sexually assaulting these kids. We went to the Donna tent facility. It is a gigantic tent city that's been built, the Rio Grande Valley, and it is the Joe Biden cages. Now, for 4 years, we heard kids in cages every day on the press. What the press never told you is Barack Obama built the cages. And under Joe Biden, the cages are bigger and they're more full than they've ever been before. And the media, their approach is to hide it all. When we went down to the border, the Biden administration's policy was no cameras allowed. And the media very quietly, very docilely said, okay. By the way, the Trump administration allowed cameras in. The Obama administration did. The Clinton administration did. The George W. Bush administration did. But under Joe Biden, nope, nothing to see here. Because they didn't want pictures of the Biden cages. Well, as I mentioned, I brought 19 senators down there. And when we went in to see the Biden cages, I pulled out my cell phone. And I began taking pictures and taking videos. And some of y'all may have seen, actually, the Biden administration sent a political operative from Washington, D.C. to try to stop me, to jump in front of the phone. Please don't take these pictures. She said, please respect these people. I said, you respect these people. Those cages were filled with little boys and little girls on top of each other. The rate of COVID positivity when we were there was over 10%. McAllen, Texas, last couple of weeks, announced that the Biden administration has released illegal immigrants into McAllen, over 7,000 of whom were COVID positive. Now, let me put that in perspective. The population of McAllen is about 141,000 people. That means 5% of the population of the city consists of illegal immigrants released by Joe Biden who have COVID. I'm here to tell you right now, the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was a super spreader event in the state of Texas. By the way, the Houston Chronicle just did a big editorial that said there's no crisis at the border. There's no problem at all, nothing to see here. And in fact, they said it is false to say that releasing tens of thousands of illegal aliens with COVID somehow contributes to the spread of COVID. Like, really? Like, to be honest, I want to take their editorial, just read it out loud. You remember in 2012 when I was running against Dewhurst, the Chronicle endorsed Dewhurst, and they endorsed him because they said he'll be more like LBJ. And so I emailed the endorsement out everyone I could. I said, all right, the Chronicle's told you what they think's going to happen. I'm willing to say right now, I will not be more like LBJ. The crisis we're seeing fiscally, economically, domestically. We've got an assault on free speech. We've got an assault on religious liberty. We've got an assault on the Second Amendment. And that doesn't even begin to address the absolute disaster that is foreign policy. As messed up as the Biden administration is, economically and domestically, if anything, their foreign policy is worse. They've managed to antagonize our friends and allies and kiss up to, appease, and surrender to our enemies. I honestly don't know what happens in their situation room when they're like, okay, Russia, China, Iran, the Taliban, our buddies. Israel, can't stand them. Like, what in the hell are they doing? But here's the good news. That's where we are. Politics has a natural pendulum effect. It's been true from the dawn of time. One party gets in power, they go too far one direction, and the American people says, hold on a second, and they pull us back. And I'm here to tell you that people are waking up all across Texas and all across this country. We are seeing a revival. A whole lot of the men and women in this room got started in the political world back in 2009, back at the dawn of the Tea Party, when extreme and radical policies were so out there that a bunch of folks that had never been involved in politics said, what in the heck are we doing? And it turned this country around. Well, I'm proud to tell you that same thing is happening again. And I'll give you a kind of, look, when I see what they're doing, and it gets more and more and more radical, part of me, my heart breaks. And I hurt for our country, the policies we're enduring. But part of me, I quietly celebrate. Because every dumbass thing they do, there are a whole bunch of folks in this country who, you know, Joe Biden ran as this centrist, moderate Uncle Joe. Nothing to see here, can't find my bathroom slippers. But you won't have any more mean tweets. And there were some folks who said, oh, that sounds nice, who didn't sign up for the socialist revolution of open borders and abolishing the police and packing the Supreme Court and destroying democracy and tearing down our fundamental rights. And I'll tell you right now, I believe people are waking up all over this country, and that 2022 is going to be a fantastic election. And 2024 is going to be even better.
Is that an announcement, Senator?
So let's do some questions.
Yeah, let's get to some questions. And you are right, people are waking up. That's why we here at True Texas have educated over 500 citizen advocates since January. So God bless y'all for that. So our first question tonight is on medical freedom. As you can imagine, it is on everybody's minds. I think many people are a little bit confused about where you stand on medical freedom because of some recent social media, and whether or not vaccinated or unvaccinated people should be treated differently. We have seen your response to the Grassroots Coalition letter that was sent to you recently, and had detailed explanations of your position and the bill that you authored on this subject, but perhaps it requires a bit more clarification. So this question is from Michelle in Collin County, who is one of our satellite groups. You have previously stated that you would stand up and ensure the unvaccinated were not discriminated against. Since then, you have written a bill that allows measures such as masking, social distancing, or additional PPE equipment for being unvaccinated. Please explain how this is not discrimination. These outward signs violate a person's medical privacy rights by alerting those around them that they have chosen not to be vaccinated. So isn't that discrimination? And we're going to ask you to keep your answers to about 3 minutes because we have so many.
Yeah, no, that's...
Thank you.
All right, so let me tell you my approach to this issue generally, and then I'll answer the question specifically. But let me lay out my approach to this issue generally. Listen, I believe in individual freedom. That means we should have no mandates, zero mandates when it comes to COVID. That means no mask mandates. That means no vaccine mandates. And that means no vaccine passports. Now listen, my view on this, I think COVID is a serious disease. I think particularly for vulnerable populations, it can be quite dangerous. for the very elderly, for people with serious health issues, COVID can be deadly. And across the country, across the world, we've taken extraordinary steps to try to protect the vulnerable and to keep people safe. I think that makes sense. I also think in the last year, we did some crazy things. Listen, we saw, by the way, on toilet paper, I'm sorry, this is a digression, don't take it out of my time. But when they ran out of toilet paper, I went online and I tried to order some toilet paper. And there's a reason Heidi doesn't let me shop. So and all the brands you've heard of, you couldn't get any of them. So I ordered some from China. And Heidi laughed at me. So it took 6 weeks to get here. And when it arrived, it was the most miserable, dilapidated, pitiful rolls of toilet paper I'd ever seen in my life. So that's neither here nor there, but it is a true story. And I tweeted out a picture of the really lame Chinese toilet paper that I got sent. So I'm glad those shortages are over. Listen, we saw shutdowns across the country that destroyed small businesses, that destroyed restaurants, that destroyed bars, that destroyed concert venues, that destroyed family businesses that had been built over generations, that unemployed millions of people. And we saw schools shut down in a lot of parts of the country for a year. I think years from now, people are going to look back to 2020 and say, what in the heck were these people thinking? The single most indefensible policy has been shutting down the schools. And there are tens of millions of kids that are getting left behind because idiot politicians shut down the schools and left the kids at home, and we have a whole generation of kids that are failing to learn reading and writing and arithmetic and science and history and art, and it is wrong and we shouldn't do it. Now, when it comes to the question of vaccines, listen, personally, I believe in vaccines. I've taken the vaccine. Heidi's taken the vaccine. My parents have taken the vaccine. Her parents have taken the vaccine. But look, the beauty of it is, you and I don't have to agree on that. Because, here's why we don't have to agree on that. Because I believe in individual freedom and responsibility. Which means that I think every one of us can make a decision for ourselves. We can talk to our doctors and make a decision whether or not we want to get vaccinated. And if you want to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. And if you don't want to get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. But nobody should force you to do it. That means the federal government shouldn't force you to do it. That means the state government shouldn't force you to do it. That means the city government shouldn't force you to do it. That means your employer shouldn't force you to do it. And so when it comes to fighting this fight, there is no one in the United States Senate who is fighting harder against these mandates. I've introduced legislation to ban vaccine mandates. I've introduced legislation to end the federal mask mandates. And I've introduced legislation to ban vaccine passports. Now, the legislation that was asked in this question, right now, unfortunately, our civil rights laws are not providing protections to people for vaccines. We had a big hospital down in Houston, mandated every one of their employees get vaccines, and if they didn't, they were fired. We have Joe Biden, who is telling every soldier and sailor and airman and Marine in this country, you got to get a vaccine. That is fundamentally wrong. And so the legislation I introduced was legislation to create a civil rights remedy, so if your employer tries to force you to get a vaccine, if they try to discriminate against you, that you have a legal redress. Right now, the employees of that hospital in Houston sued them. Case was thrown out of court. So listen, what are the prospects of the legislation I introduced passing? Unfortunately, I can quantify it. 0.0%. Because every single Democrat supports the mandates. And there's a consequence to having a Congress that is led by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. So I'm going to keep fighting and making the case that we ought to respect individual freedom, that we ought to treat people like adults, that we ought to say the government and your employer has no business forcing you to make a private and personal health care decision. That's for you to make with your doctor.
Thank you. And understanding that that bill has 0.0 chance, do we not need to keep hammering the issue, keep bringing it up, keep pushing back? Because these are issues we can use in the 2022 election. Am I right?
Amen, and it is an important issue to bring it back. And I think particularly, look, in a time of crisis, it reveals people's character. And the character of so many of these blue state politicians, they are petty tyrants. You know, in California, they sent bulldozers to fill skate parks with sand because they didn't want teenagers skating. I mean, it's asinine. You've got Bill de Blasio in New York City sending police officers to arrest and to harass Orthodox Jews. And listen, it's not hard to recognize that their arguments are incoherent. So, the argument of the Democrats and the media are that if you gather together in a massive Black Lives Matter protest, nobody will get COVID.
But these people are all in trouble. You're all going to get sick.
But if you go to church and sing Amazing Grace, everyone's going to die. Yep. Now, look, there may actually be a tiny kernel of truth to it because the virus came from China, so maybe it's a communist.
Okay, let's move on. Our next question is from Lisa in Travis County, one of our newest satellites. They just started last month. So, hello, Travis County. Lisa says, arguably, the collusion between big tech and government has risen to the point where big tech can be considered a state actor and thus subject to the First Amendment. So what can be done that does not involve the Department of Justice or other Biden administration-controlled entities?
That's a great question. It's a very savvy question. I'm going to follow the same pattern. I'm going to talk about the issue generally, and then I'm going to talk about the specific question. Big tech censorship is, I believe, the single greatest threat to free speech and to free and fair elections we have in this country. And they are brazen, they are unapologetic, they are drunk with power. And they are trying to silence every person in this room and control and silence anyone who disagrees with them. And I think we need to use every tool we have to stop it. Now, what does that mean? Well, for several years, I was the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I chaired multiple hearings on big tech censorship to lay out what was happening and talk about 3 different remedies we had. Number one, and let me say before you get to any of the remedies, nobody wants to see a federal government speech police. That would be a terrible outcome. So that's a bad way to approach the problem. But there are at least 3 ways we can approach the problem. Number one, right now big tech has a special immunity from liability called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That they have an immunity from liability nobody else gets. And the reason Congress gave them that immunity from liability is they believed big tech would be a neutral public forum. They wouldn't censor people. Well, big tech stopped doing that. And my view is, if they're going to be biased and political, there's no reason on earth they should get a special benefit. They should get corporate welfare that nobody else gets. So that's remedy number one. Remedy number two, the antitrust laws. By any measure, big tech is bigger and more powerful than Standard Oil was when we broke it up under the antitrust laws. It's bigger and more powerful than AT&T was when we broke it up under the antitrust laws, and I would bust them up today. And then number three is a theory that sounds in consumer protection and deception. And the simplest way of putting it is, when you sign up for a social media site, the basic promise they make to you as a consumer is if you post something, the people who follow you will see what you post. And if you choose to follow someone, you'll see what they post. They are breaking that promise every single day. That is a lie. And so I can tell you, in the last administration on this question of using the full force of the federal government to go after big tech, I met repeatedly with President Trump, with the Vice President, with the White House Chief of Staff, with the White House Counsel, with the U.S. Attorney General, with the Deputy Attorney General, with the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, with the Chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, with the General Counsel of the Federal Trade Commission, and with the Chairman of the FCC. Every one of those was individual meetings. Several of them were 2 or 3 meetings, pressing them to use the enforcement power of the federal government to go after big tech. Unfortunately, many of the people in the administration were not able to marshal the enforcement power of the federal government to do that. And I think that was a missed opportunity that is deeply painful. Now, the question that was asked is actually a very novel theory that is the basis for President Trump's lawsuit against big tech right now. So y'all may remember a couple of months ago when the Fauci emails came out. And Fauci was emailing with lots of people, including Mark Zuckerberg, and saying, Mark, would you please censor the following? Would you please silence and cover up the following? Things like saying the Wuhan virus came from Wuhan. And Zuckerberg, of course, saluted, sir, yes, sir, happy to be the government censor. At the time, so I do every week a podcast. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. At the time, I devoted an entire podcast to the Fauci emails, and what I said at the time is I said, this has dramatically exposed big tech's liability. And the reason is, so look, big tech's biggest defense against the Trump lawsuit is they say the First Amendment only applies to the government, and that is generally true. First Amendment begins with Congress shall make no law. First Amendment applies to the federal government, to state governments, to local governments, but it doesn't as a general matter apply to private companies or private individuals. There's an exception to that, a very important exception, which is when a private company becomes an instrumentality of the state, when the state uses a private company to carry out unconstitutional censorship, then the Supreme Court has allowed liability. And the thing about these Fauci emails is they lay out the predicate for that case. And I can tell you, before President Trump filed that lawsuit, his team sent the lawsuit to me. I read the complaint before it was filed. And it actually got even stronger because you had Joe Biden and Jen Psaki. By the way, I'll circle back to her. But you have them from the podium at the White House asking big tech to censor people. And so big tech is acting as the arm of the federal government. It is still a novel legal theory, so I don't want to oversell the chances of success. It could end up losing in court. But because of what's been made public, the claim has gotten much, much stronger, and I think we ought to pursue everything we have. I think we ought to pursue private litigation. I think state attorneys general, and I'm glad to see Texas going after big tech. We ought to do everything we can to protect free speech.
Okay, let's move on to another topic. This is from one of our supporters in Lubbock. What can you tell us about the status and condition of prisoners being held without bail for the January 6th protest at the Capitol? and what is being done to reconcile their cases? And let's keep mindful of the time.
Look, it's a very good question. And if you look at what happened on January 6th, I think Democrats and the media are conflating a whole lot of different circumstances. And they're treating them all the same. Now, let me start with what I believe. If on January 6th or January 5th or today or any other day, you engage in an act of violence, if you criminally assault a police officer, you should be prosecuted and you should go to jail for a very long time. And I don't care about your politics. I don't care if your politics are you're a left-wing activist or you're someone I happen to agree with politically. None of us have a right to physically assault a police officer, and if you do, you're going to jail. On January 6th, there were people there that committed violent assaults on police officers, and I think it is right and good that they're being prosecuted. I also think the Biden administration is trying to lump together every person who exercised their free speech rights. Every person who happened to be in Washington, D.C., who was speaking, who was raising a sign, who was speaking out, and they're trying to call every one of those individuals terrorists. I can tell you, flying back after January 6th, I was in the airport, ran into a bunch of Texans, some older ladies who were crying, who said, you know, we were standing in the mall singing God Bless America, and now we're being called terrorists. I think that's an absolute abuse of power. The government has no power to prosecute anyone for peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights.
Okay. But some of those people being held were peacefully exercising their rights. What can we do about that?
So listen, I've joined with other senators, I've called on the Department of Justice to outline who's being held, under what circumstances, and what are the crimes they're being charged with. Right now, the Biden Department of Justice is stonewalling. And they're trying to lump everyone together, and it's wrong. If they committed a violent crime, prosecute them. If you just happen to disagree with them politically, then don't abuse your power. And I think the Biden Justice Department is doing an awful lot of the latter.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question of what do we do? To be honest, what we can do is shine a light on it. There are consequences to having a Democratic president, a Democratic Speaker of the House, and a Democratic Senate Majority Leader. And the consequences are, there is nobody in this room that has the power to bring a criminal charge or to dismiss a criminal charge, a federal criminal charge. Only the U.S. Department of Justice can do that. Well, you could try that, but that's not the way the justice system works.
Okay, let's stay on topic here.
My suggestion, you want to do something about it, number one, call it out. Number two, shine a light on it. Number three, win in 2022, get majorities in Congress. You can then hold hearings, you can then do enforcement, but you can't do it when the Democrats control the two houses.
So, okay, let's settle down. I know we're all passionate about this, but the senator is right. Elections have consequences. Okay, next question. This is from someone in Denton County, which is our oldest satellite location. Why have not Senate Republicans put up a bill to close the border? Even though it wouldn't pass, you'd force Democrats to admit that bringing in a new electorate is more important than the spread of COVID. They would have to choose, is COVID a threat or not? Have you seen such a bill, or would you be willing to work on one?
There have been multiple bills like that. We voted on multiple bills like that. So we've had 3 or 4 what are called votoramas. And what a votorama is, I'll get into a little procedural minutia to explain the background. As a general matter, the filibuster means you need 60 votes to proceed to legislation to get a vote in the Senate. The biggest exception to that is something called budget reconciliation. Budget reconciliation happens under the Budget Act of 1975, and when you're doing budget reconciliation, you only need 50 votes to pass something. So that's the vehicle Democrats used to pass their $1.9 trillion so-called COVID relief bill. That's the vehicle they used for this infrastructure bill last week, so-called. That's the vehicle they're using for this $3.5 trillion Bernie Sanders budget and all the tax increases. One of the consequences of reconciliation is it's the one instance you can have unlimited amendments. And so each time we've done, the process of unlimited amendments is known as vote-a-rama. And you basically just stay there and have amendment after amendment after amendment until everyone basically falls overtired. And so 3 times we've been there all night long offering amendments trying to stop the bills. And so each time, I believe, there's been at least one and often several amendments focused on illegal immigration, whether focused on building the wall, whether focused on Kate's Law, whether focused on not sending stimulus checks to illegal immigrants. That's one I introduced. I mean, we've had multiple amendments focused on the border crisis, and on every single one, all or virtually all of the Democrats voted against it. So I agree with get them on record and get them on account. The sad thing is they're not afraid of this issue. They are counting on the media to cover it up. And let me give a warning to folks here. Look, all of us understand the crisis that's playing out at the border, but that's because everyone here watches Fox News or Newsmax or OAN. You get your news from right-of-center outlets. I got to tell you, if you're a resident of the Dallas suburbs and you watch CNN or you watch ABC or CBS or NBC, or you read the Dallas Morning News, you don't know there's a border crisis happening. The media is complicit in this cover-up. And so I want to give a warning for us not to get complacent. We're so horrified at what's happening that we think everyone else must be as well, but we got an obligation to educate them with the facts, because if we're counting on them to know what's happening, the media's lying to them.
Okay. This is a question on gender modification of minors from Ellis County. The reality of gender assignment surgeries is graphic and horrifying. Pictures of the after effects of these surgeries would probably collapse all support for this issue. Would you consider using your influence by putting out a press release or having a press conference to show some of these images? We are behind you, but we need you to push the limits on issues like this.
Look, I think this is an important issue, and I agree that when you have children being subjected to medical treatments, whether to suppress hormones or to do other things to medically try to force a gender transition, I think it is grotesque. I think it is cruel. I think it is child abuse. Now listen, if an adult wants to do that, I believe in individual freedoms. If an adult wants to do that, if you want to go get chopped, I don't agree with it. I'm not advocating for it, but I actually believe if an adult wants to do that, you have the freedom to make that choice. A 6, 7, or 8-year-old child doesn't have the emotional or intellectual maturity to make that choice in a way that could hamper his or her life for the rest of their life. And I think often when it's happening, you have parents who are trying to make a woke political statement at the expense of their child. So, in terms of the legal regime, the federal government doesn't have a role in regulating that. That is regulated at the state level. But I can tell you when it comes to Texas, I have spoken out vocally and repeatedly against gender modification of children and medical mutilation of children, and I'll continue speaking out because I think it is cruel and wrong.
Can you send the Democrats back that are hiding out in D.C. so that we can take a vote on that issue? I'm just kidding.
They'll come back eventually.
This question is from Benji in Dallas County. Go Dallas. Novavax developed a vaccine that uses technology that's been around for decades and has fewer side effects than other vaccines. Why has the government given them billions of tax dollars to take their vaccines to foreign countries before making it available here for Americans? People who are open to getting the vaccine might be more inclined to do so if it was the same technology as their pertussis and hepatitis vaccines that they are familiar with. If the government really wants everyone vaccinated, why not make the safest choice available to us instead of sending it overseas?
So look, I think that is a fair and reasonable question. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. If you're asking me what vaccine you should take, I don't know. And you know, why on earth would you follow the views of some politicians on what medical treatment to get? If you got a constitutional law case, I've got some actually fairly considered views, but I've never practiced medicine. What is bizarre about this pandemic is the heavy-handed authoritarian views of Washington. Some of you all may have seen a couple of weeks ago, I gave a long and really angry speech on the Senate floor. About number one, the CDC. And has there ever been an institution that has more destroyed its credibility more rapidly than the CDC? Now, Congress has been doing it much more slowly. It's been a slow, and I'm not sure it was ever that high. Look, a year and a half ago, the CDC had real credibility. In America and abroad, it was a respected scientific and medical institution. And for whatever reason, they allowed themselves to be brazenly politicized. And I think Dr. Fauci stepped forward to be the face of this and showed a complete willingness and eagerness to politicize it, right down to saying in writing, nope, masks don't work. To yes, masks work, but I'm going to lie to the American people and say they don't work because I don't want them to buy them right now. To then you got to wear masks. To then you got to wear 2 masks. To then, if you get the vaccine, you don't need to wear a mask. To then, if you got the vaccine, you got to wear a mask. And it's like, you know, watching John McEnroe in a tennis match. You're like, it obviously doesn't make sense. And what ticked me off that time is Nancy Pelosi. So Nancy Pelosi right now is fining members of Congress $500 if they don't wear a mask. And she has threatened for staffers, a House staffer, to have the police arrest them and put them in jail if they don't wear a mask. And I think that is an absolute abuse of power. So, but the weird thing, not only did you have the CDC and politicians spreading politicized takes on all of this, which unfortunately made everyone skeptical of whatever they said. So when there was real medical information, people have been lied to so much they were skeptical of whatever you said. Listen, one of the reasons I don't like this latest ruling of even if you have a vaccine, you still need to wear a mask, is it discourages people from taking vaccines, which they stated a month ago was the most important thing in the world. And now they're saying, well, it doesn't matter even if you get a vaccine. We're going to lock you in a room and hermetically seal you like the boy in the bubble. And part of it also is on the medical treatment. They have tried to censor and silence views and social media and YouTube, and they take down. And listen, I'm not a doctor. There are probably some doctors here. Doctors disagree. And so what's the right treatment there? Hydroxychloroquine, yes, no. What happened is Donald Trump said hydroxychloroquine, so dear God, you can't take that, you're going to die. Now, by the way, if I was sick, I wouldn't go to Donald Trump for a medical treatment. I work closely with him every day, but he's not my doctor, and I wouldn't take medical advice from him. But the stupidity of, so on the particular vaccine, I don't know. But we ought to have fair and honest conversations about the different kinds of vaccines. And actually, y'all will appreciate, everyone here knows my dad. My dad and I had a month-long argument about the vaccine. He didn't want to take a vaccine. I wanted him to because I wanted him to come out. He ultimately decided to. But you know what? He's a grown man and he can make that decision on his own. And so we ought to be able to fairly discuss it, and we ought to be able to look at the different vaccines and say, all right, what are the risks and what are the downsides? And by the way, Heidi and I have not given the vaccines to our 10-year-old and 13-year-old daughters. Because in my family, the calculus for my father at 82 or for me at 50 out every day was a different risk analysis than it is for a 10-year-old girl. So that's how our family made that decision. If your family makes it different, your family can make it differently. But we ought to be able to have full and robust discussions. We shouldn't have this artificially censored silencing of medical views that happen to disagree with whatever the government says on that particular day.
Thank you. The next question is from Harris County. The infrastructure bill being considered right now seems to have less to do with actual infrastructure and more to do with Democrat pet projects. It is also too expensive, spending money we don't have, increasing the debt. With even Republican senators voting for it, it probably cannot be stopped. But is there still a chance to negotiate it at all or pull any political wins out of the argument?
You know, it's interesting. Listen, I agree with that question. I think the infrastructure bill is a bad bill. I voted no. I voted no at every stage. I spoke out loudly against it. I urge my colleagues not to pass it. You know, I can tell you for about a month, I will say on the substance, the infrastructure bill on the merits is the least bad of these big bills that have moved. If you compare it to the $1.9 trillion so-called COVID relief bill, if you compare it to the $3.5 trillion monstrosity, the infrastructure is the least bad. There's actually some reasonable expenditures included in it. For a month in the Senate Republican Conference, we have lunch together when we're in session every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we're in a room, 50 Republican senators discussing what's going on. For a month, we had knockdown, drag-out arguments about this. And about a third of the conference supported it, about two-thirds of us didn't. I can tell you the argument I made to the people who were putting this forward. I said, listen, if you had negotiated a deal with the Democrats that they would support this bill instead of the $3.5 trillion monstrosity that jacks up taxes and has monstrous spending, I could understand that. If it were do this instead of that, we could have a reasonable conversation. I think you'd see a large percentage of the conference vote for it if it were instead of doing that. But here's the problem. You didn't negotiate anything from them. The Democrats have said, we're going to pass the $1.2 trillion, and then we're going to come back and pass every other thing we were going to pass anyway on top of it. And so I thought that made no sense, and I said, listen, the only result of this is going to be that Joe Biden's going to run out and say, see how bipartisan we are. We got all these Republicans going along with the spending. And it's going to be really hard for people to distinguish between the one bill and the other. They're just going to see trillions of dollars of spending, and they're going to see inflation going up and up and up and up. And I think there's an inflation bomb that is detonating across this country. And what I urge my colleagues is don't put any Republican fingerprints on it. If they want to do it, let them do it, but don't be complicit. At the end of the day, we didn't prevail. They had the votes to pass it. I do think we slowed down momentum, and I and others speaking out against it, you started to see several senators who had been proponents of the bill back off. I think that said something about where the momentum was. On the prospects of stopping it in the House, I don't know. It's a narrow it's past the Senate. It is out of the Senate, and it's in the House now. If the House passes it, it goes to Joe Biden. Whether the House will pass it, I don't know. I assume all of the Democrats will vote for it. If they do, they have enough to pass it. So in the Senate, you can have a hurdle of needing 60 votes. They don't need 60 votes in the House. They need a majority of just one. So if the Democrats vote for it, it will pass. The only way it gets scuttled is, frankly, if the far left scuttles it because they demanded it be even worse. And they might be crazy enough to take it down. So go AOC.
Would you like some water?
I would love some water.
We are not taking questions from the floor. Thank you. Withdrawal from Afghanistan has been a nightmare for us and the Afghani people. Why are we allowing thousands of refugees into Texas from Afghanistan? Are they being vetted? Most of the ones I see on the news are young men, not women and children, who are most vulnerable. What about the Americans who are trying to get out of the country, missionaries who've been threatened with their lives? Shouldn't they be our priority? At the moment, our borders are being overrun. How can Texas take in thousands more refugees?
So it's a great question. Let me take several pieces of it. Let's start with what's happening in Afghanistan right now. It is an absolute catastrophe. It is horrifying to watch. It is a combination of ideological extremism on the part of this administration, along with absolute incompetence. If you look at what's happening, there are only two possibilities. Number one, either the intelligence community and the Defense Department failed to anticipate and failed to plan for the meltdown that has occurred. Number one. Or number two, they did anticipate the meltdown. They did know what was going to happen, and the Biden administration, for political reasons or otherwise, disregarded that intelligence and disregarded that advice. Here's what I think we should do. Number one, the first priority right now should be getting the Americans out of Afghanistan. There are thousands of Americans trapped in Afghanistan, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, by all appearances, have no clue and no plan to get them out. And they're just throwing up their hands in the air and leaving them. That is wrong, and we need to get them out and evacuate them now. And let me point out one of the reasons the evacuation is so challenging, because the Biden administration did something that I think is truly indefensible. Bagram Air Base, which is a base we invested over $1 billion in. I've been to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. It was secure, it had a secure perimeter, it had a runway, we could take off and land, and there was not a damn thing the Taliban could do about it. The Biden administration, just a few weeks ago, abandoned Bagram Air Base. And they actually did it in the middle of the night. The Afghans didn't even know they were gone. They literally woke up the next day and said, wait, where are the Americans? Like they just snuck out at night like a teenager climbing out of the window. And it was idiotic. The Taliban now controls Bagram Air Base, including, it's been reported, a number of Black Hawk helicopters and other U.S. military equipment. I just joined in a letter to the Secretary of Defense calling for an accounting of every piece of U.S. military equipment that might be in the hands of the Taliban. Now, my view, I think it was time to end the war. I think it was time to bring our soldiers home. But it wasn't time to do it in a half-assed way that leaves them in utter chaos, and we should have held on to Bagram Air Base, which we built, which we paid for, and had an orderly, a systemic removal and evacuation with a secure perimeter that protected everyone's safety. So let me take the second half of the question, the refugees. The refugees is a complicated question, and let me give you my views on it. My views are twofold. Number one, there are a significant number of Afghans, thousands of them, who helped us. who assisted the U.S. military, who served as translators, who served and helped us fight against the Taliban. And when they did that, we made promises that we'd have their back. In my view, the Biden administration just abandoning thousands of them to almost certain slaughter, I think is wrong and immoral. The images of people holding on to the wheels of American planes as they take off and falling to their death is haunting. And by the way, we have a bad habit of doing that. We did it to the Kurds in Iraq decades before. And if we want people abroad to trust America and to work with our soldiers and support us, we can't have a habit of betraying the people who help us. So, what do? That does not mean every Afghan who said he participated in any way should suddenly be allowed into America. That's what the Biden administration wants to do. So they're trying to take their disaster in Afghanistan and use it to justify a flood of new immigrants to the United States. I believe anyone that comes to this country as a refugee should be thoroughly and completely vetted and should come legally. And so what do we do in the interim? What do we do with the thousands of people who have reasonable and credible claims that they assisted us, but that the Biden administration has not vetted? I think what we should do in the interim is move them to a neutral and safe third country where the Taliban can't kill them, and then before anyone is allowed to come through the legal processes, they should be vetted. Listen, it was the Taliban in Afghanistan that supported and funded 9/11 in the first place, and we shouldn't be bringing in new terrorists to carry out another attack. And so I think we should vet anyone who comes to this country.
Thank you. This will be a quick one, I hope. Why are we not screaming about Biden overruling the Supreme Court on rental moratoriums?
Let me set this down. Look, I think the eviction moratorium is a bizarre and unconstitutional power grab. It's being done through the CDC, which is just weird. Like, I don't even know how you present the argument, okay, your local Walgreens is saying you can't be evicted. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it is, and what's interesting is the Biden administration knows they don't have a credible basis. You listen to their defenses, they say, well, it may not be legal, but, yeah, that's kind of a problem. So, yes, we should be calling them out. And unfortunately, it is part of a larger pattern of lawlessness that we're seeing from the Biden administration. I think it will only get worse.
I think we're seeing it in many places, school districts, cities, counties, state level things. We need to always be calling that out. Okay, rumors have spread that you had endorsed Greg Abbott for governor. As you can see from this event tonight, we favor anyone but Abbott. Will you commit to either endorsing an Abbott challenger or not endorsing at all in this primary race?
All right, so let me tell you my views on this. There are a lot of people running for governor. A lot of people I like, a lot of people I respect, a lot of people who I consider to be friends. Let me tell you a little bit of my personal history with Greg Abbott, because some of you know it, but some of you don't. So I first met Greg Abbott 19 years ago. 2002, he had just been elected Attorney General. And I met him when I flew down to Austin to interview with him to be Solicitor General. I was at the time 31 years old. I was a kid. I interviewed with him, and he hired me as the Solicitor General of Texas, as the chief appellate lawyer for the state of Texas. At the time, I had argued 2 cases in my life. To be honest, he made an enormous leap of faith hiring me in that position. He gambled on me. I can't vouch for the wisdom of that choice, but I'm grateful for it. I then spent 5.5 years working for Greg Abbott. When I showed up in that job a couple months later, here are the marching orders he gave me. He said, Ted, I want you to look across the country. And if we can stand up and fight for conservative principles, if we can make a difference defending the Constitution, go and do it. Now, some of y'all here knew me when I was 32, 33 years old. What a mandate that was, to go across the country. So when an atheist challenged the Texas Ten Commandments monument, we fought and defended it and went to the Supreme Court and won and defended it and successfully defended the Ten Commandments. When the D.C. Circuit was considering the landmark decision of Heller versus District of Columbia over the Second Amendment, I went to Greg Abbott and said, look, we need to go and defend the Second Amendment. And he said, go and fight. And we went, and I argued the case, the companion case, in the Court of Appeals. And we went to the Supreme Court, and we won 5-4 upholding the Second Amendment. And then in the case of Medellin versus Texas, which many of y'all know, it's a case where the World Court and the United Nations issued an order to Texas and to the entire country to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. And Texas stood up. We fought the World Court, we fought the United Nations, and we fought the President of the United States. And the President, by the way, was a Texan and a Republican named George W. Bush, who signed an order that purported to order the state courts to obey the World Court. Greg Abbott was my boss. I went in and said, all right, we're going to go fight George W. Bush in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And Abbott said, go, fight, and win. And we did. We won 6-3, striking down the World Court and the President's order. So I spent 5.5 years working for Greg Abbott every single day. He is a close friend. And listen, in politics, everyone says, my friend, my friend. Usually when they say that, the person they're talking about, they despise. Our daughter Caroline, who's 13, for the first 10 years of her life, had a pink teddy bear that was 3 feet high that Greg and Cecilia gave Caroline when Caroline was born. When I ran for office, when I ran for Senate, when I ran for president, Greg Abbott was by my side. He campaigned for me. He fought for me. I can tell you very, very simply, if it were not for Greg Abbott, I wouldn't be in the U.S. Senate. There's no way on earth I would be in the Senate today were it not for Greg Abbott. So listen, I understand there are a lot of folks here who have concerns with some of the things Greg Abbott has done. I understand that. I understand that, and I think primaries are healthy things in politics. But I got to say, as for me, I'm going to vote for Greg Abbott. And to be honest, that's fine, that's fine. Look, to be honest, I think I'd be a disloyal jackass if I didn't vote for him, given 2 decades of our working side by side. And so the political process can play out, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from, because I've got 20 years of history behind our friendship.
Thank you. So we all believe in freedom of choice. This is one vote. There's 500, 600 votes out there. Okay, next question. What legislation is being passed while the public is focused on Afghanistan? Example, are we watching the right hand while the wrong hand while the other hand does something unbeknownst to the public? It's handwritten. I'm having trouble reading it.
So I can give a tiny bit of good news, which is for the next 4 weeks, Congress is out of session.
Yay!
I will say a cynical friend of mine once suggested that the First Amendment should have ended after the fifth word, Congress shall make no law. Is Congress going to do bad things under the cloud of distraction? Absolutely yes. What I can tell you is I'm going to fight against it with every ounce of strength in my body. And I'll give a specific example. So the last thing the Senate did before we broke and everyone went home to travel across our respective states is we had an all-night vote-a-rama on this infrastructure bill, and we had numerous amendments that I introduced and others. And then everyone went home and went to bed, and at 3:30 in the morning, Chuck Schumer stood up and tried to pass S1, what many are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act. And it was 3:30 in the morning, and I was the only Republican senator remaining in the chamber. And I stood up and said, not only no, but hell no. And this would undermine election security. It would steal the right to vote from the American people. It is a brazen power grab, and this will not pass. So, yes, they're going to try bad stuff, but I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to stop it.
Well, actually, that was the next question, and it was my question. It wasn't really a question. I wanted to say thank you for staying awake all night and shutting down that bill. Okay, we are going to start bringing this to a close. This one last thing, it's not really a question, but I thought it was really good. It says, I assume there are times when you could use more support from your colleagues. How can we be aware of what topics you need our support and who we should contact in order to help you be most effective? As citizen advocates, we want to know this. I mean, we send emails and we make phone calls, but what more could we be doing to promote good things in the Senate?
Well, look, that's a great question, and it's a great note to close on, because I really want to take a moment to really thank each of you. Our democracy only works when we have smart, educated, informed citizens who are engaged in the process. When the Tea Party wave began to rise in 2009 and 2010, the career politicians in Washington were horrified. They had never seen the citizens holding them accountable. Look, the questions you guys asked were well researched, they were detailed, they were factual. You know your stuff, that's great. And by the way, not everyone's going to agree with everyone else 100% of the time. If you find two people that do, that's impressive. But at the end of the day, every elected official, we work for you. And the more you're engaged, what I would say is speak out, engage on social media, ask questions of our elected officials, make phone calls. Phone calls work. 2013, when I filibustered against Obamacare, I still remember one of my colleagues in one of our lunches looking at me red-faced, and he pounded the table and went, Ted, my constituents keep calling me! It works and it matters, and frankly, your role is even more important because some of the role of accountability used to be performed at least a little bit, badly, but a little bit, by the press. They don't do that anymore, which means the only accountability that is going to happen is going to come from the people. So what I would say, in terms of how you can help, speak out, pray for us. Let me say thank you for the people here who lift us up in prayer. We need it. Heidi and I and our girls, we are supported. We have a hedge of protection around us that the prayer warriors in this room are praying into place. And sometimes people ask, well, how do you deal with all the nastiness and all the insults? And I promise you, the time I've been standing on this stage, 1,000 people on Twitter have told me to go F myself. That's just, and they didn't abbreviate it. And sometimes people say, well, how do you deal with that? And to be honest, the answer is, I keep in mind who I'm working for. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to the men and women of Texas. And it's a little bit, the nastier the fight gets. In some ways, I'm gratified. There's an old line that if they're not shooting at you, you're not doing much of anything. And when the media is coming after you, I've said many times, if the New York Times ever praises me, I will resign that day. I don't think we've got a great risk. But continue playing the role of being informed, being educated. And let me say something else, which is, look, this is an ugly time in politics. There's just a lot of nastiness. There's hatred. There's hatred on both sides. And I want to encourage you, even when the other side is mean and nasty and vicious, don't respond in kind. Be happy warriors. Be joyful warriors. My father's favorite scripture is from Proverbs. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And there's a lot of weeping happening in this country, but I believe the American people are waking up, and I believe in all of my heart that morning is coming. And it's coming because of your leadership, your sacrifice, your engagement, and not just with each other in the room, not just preaching to the choir, but talking to your friends, talking to your families, talking to your neighbors, talking to the mom in the carpool line, saying, aren't you tired of this craziness? Wouldn't you like to just have an open school? Wouldn't you like to just have an open business? Wouldn't you like to have the government stay the heck out of your health care decisions? Wouldn't you like to see the taxes and regulations stop destroying your business? That's what y'all are doing. I wouldn't be in the Senate without you. We absolutely need fair elections. And so I want to encourage you, keep speaking up, keep speaking the truth, keep educating yourself, and keep defending two very simple principles: freedom and the Constitution.
Thank you, Senator. We so appreciate you being with us tonight. I know scheduling is difficult and you're flying out somewhere else tonight, so please, let's give the Senator another big round of applause. Thank you.
Okay. There is a little story that I feel compelled to share with you guys before we close this out. And I'm just going to take some license and share this story. Back in 2010, many of us from Northeast Tarrant Tea Party supported a state rep named Giovanni Capriglione. Gio was one of us. We worked heart and soul. My family and I went to dinner with him on many occasions. We were close friends, okay? A couple years later, Gio started turning, as we all know politicians do on a regular basis. We started holding him accountable and having tough conversations. He still did not turn his ways, and in the end, we no longer support Giovanni. So I would encourage Senator Cruz to hold Governor Abbott accountable and then do whatever step comes next. Have a good night.